Hey guys, welcome back to Altaz-Review, where we talk about the latest developments in gaming. Almost out of nowhere, we just got our first real trailer for the Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. After so much anticipation and no reassurances, it looks like we finally got a lot of information on a random Wednesday. There's truly nothing but speculation to be had, but since we know quite a bit about the lore and general settings of Elden Ring, our speculations might not be too off. And once Wati and Zuli get a hold of the trailer, we're sure to find out a whole lot more. So let's talk about what we saw in the trailer and what we can make of it. The trailer starts off with Mog's boss arena, showing what's left of Miquella's cocoon. It kind of feels like this might be the entry point for the DLC, kind of like how Dark Souls 3 had a fast travel point near a boss area for both of its DLCs. But if that's true, then that means players may need to beat Mog before getting to the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. Once we get to the DLC itself, we see the same sights as the cover art with a wheat field and several spectral tombstones, which may have more implications depending on the lore of this area. There's also the two intertwined trees that mirror the Erdtree or the Halite tree, but we also see that one of these trees is leaking gold sap. It makes it seem like one of the trees may be parasitic in nature. Since Miquella's lore is based around the Halite tree, the tombstones might have something to do with the effects and background of the intertwined trees. And I'll be honest, I'm not sure if these trees are connected to Miquella or a new god. We also get a look at what might be Miquella's Great Rune, a half circle with a kind of star and line going through it. The simple existence of a Great Rune just reiterates the relation to one of Radagon's children. There's also a lot of new characters that seem pretty quirky just judging from their armors, weapons, and in one case, a dude's carrying a pot for whatever reason. One of the more interesting things we got to see was a bed of sleep flowers. For one thing, it's an interesting mechanic that might be used similarly to a poison swamp, but since sleep isn't the same as death, there's probably gonna be a bunch of simpler enemies that will finish the job once your character goes into their eternal slumber. The same way we don't know much about Miquella, we also don't see a lot of info about Saint Trina, who's connected to sleep magic and sleep potions. From what we know, many people speculate that Miquella and Saint Trina may be the same person. And seeing an area so closely linked to Saint Trina in a DLC that's so closely linked to Miquella, this speculation might get some confirmations. A few other things we saw in the trailer were an abandoned church-like area that looks like it could be related to glintstone sorcery, or maybe another branch of magic entirely. There's some new magic in the DLC that doesn't match the colors or actions of the magic we've seen before, or maybe these new magics are related to this new character in the church. And then there's the compulsory poison swamp. But this time, it looks like it might be a deathblight swamp. There's no confirmation and I don't know how well that could work, but the mist and color palette lead me to think it could be deathblight. And that's definitely gonna be a pain unless we find some item that slows deathblight. We also get a quick look at a portrait that could be connected to several characters, like maybe Gideon Ofnir or maybe a new character. And then there's a legacy dungeon next to the intertwined trees, just like how Leyndell is next to the Erdtree and the legacy dungeon next to the Halite tree. I'm still not sure if the majority of the DLC will take place in this legacy dungeon or if there'll be more to explore outside of it. And then let's get to some of the wacky boss fights we saw. It's not confirmed how many of these are actual bosses or if they're just tough, unique enemies, but they're unusual nonetheless. First, there's the pretty direct Wicker Man, taken straight out of Celtic myths and punishments. It also seems to be a mild reference to the Wicker Man golem from Berserk. The Wicker Man's flames also seem pretty closely linked to the main boss of this DLC, so let's see how it ties into the lore and how the boss fight is itself. Then there's the little worm monsters that might even have some relation to the worm faces in the base game, but I can't be sure about its lore yet, so maybe they're just random little worm monsters. We also saw a big lion head monster that seems kind of like the Chinese festival dragons. It also looks like there's someone behind the head manipulating the whole monster, like kids in a trench coat, so the fight and movements of this boss might actually be like a Chinese festival dragon. But it doesn't look like an easy fight, because this huge beast has several AoE attacks and throws lightning like some of the most dangerous bosses from other Souls games. So in terms of difficulty, it's not a good sign. There's also some creative enemies like the hippo porcupine that throws out its quills if you get too close or just charges at you mouth first. Elden Ring has a way of making mundane animals into terrifying death machines. And although we fought tons of skeleton variants, this time there's a giant horse-riding skeleton with a sword boomerang in some dark swamp arena. It's not your average skeleton. There's also some dual-wielding swordswoman that might have some lore connections to a few background characters, and looks to be a pretty tricky fight. And one of the more curious encounters is the same guy from the earlier portrait skewered by a barbed sword as he tries to pull it out. Looking back at From Software's other games, I'd say he's probably gonna use the same sword in some zombie boss fight. just like the Guardian Ape in Sekiro. And finally, let's talk about what looks to be the big bad of the DLC, the alleged Child of Radagon. Based on the Collector's Edition, this character is mentioned to be Messmer, and is also related to Radagon, but is called a traitor in the trailer. He has a bunch of snakes and snake-styled weapons, and a flame that's eerily similar to the cursed flames of Rykard and the Immortal Serpent. So, given the nature of betrayal to the Earth Tree and Radagon, Messmer might have followed a similar path to his brother, but without giving up his soul, at least not most of it. His eyes have the same style as a player can get by interacting with the Dragon Communion. So there's a lot going on with Messmer, from his relations to the Lords, his betrayal and relation to the Serpent, and his connections to dragons. I guess we'll also see how Messmer ties into Miquella personally, given how Miquella is a particularly important character for this DLC, and he's the only other child of Radagon in this whole relation. Shifting from lore and characters, we also have some fun gameplay additions. There's a lot of new Ashes of War and even some Crucible Knight spells. As far as I saw in the trailer, the Spear Shield really caught my eye since it adds a better version of offense for defensive builds. Then there's some dexterous weapons that take a lot from older Souls games, like the throwing dagger weapons or the fist with a whole Kung Fu moveset. There also looks to be these two dual-wielding blades with a reverse grip that seem pretty effective as a dexterity build. And of course, as we saw earlier, there's this strange pink magic that dealt some good AoE damage, and might have some other special effect. Once we know more about what branch of magic it is, we'll have a better idea of what it can do. There's some Crucible spells and a Bear Roar that might have some crazy special effect depending on the boss fight we get it from. And there's some quick-fire crossbow that's reminiscent of a bug from Dark Souls 3, but this time it's probably gonna be a little more balanced yet effective. And ultimately, we have some Miquella dialogue in the finale of the trailer. There's some speculation that Miquella might show up every now and then, kind of like how Melina shows up in the base game. But all we know is that we'll get to see Miquella for once, but the circumstances of that meeting are still a mystery. There's so much we can try to assume from this trailer, but like many of you, I'll be waiting for the future videos by Wati Vidya and Zuli the Witch to get a deeper look into all the minor details. And hopefully we'll be getting to play it ourselves on June 21st. Until then, let's keep playing Elden Ring to prepare. So that's what I got from this amazing trailer. I really want to know what everyone else understood from the trailer and what they're excited about. I'm just really happy to see anything related to Miquella, and now I'm really curious about this new Messmer guy. Let me know what you guys thought about the trailer and what other games you want to hear about. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. Until then, I hope I see you in the next video.